Ian, you okay? Good. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're the Owatonna School Board. It is Monday. It's the 25th of April. It's 5:30. We'll call the meeting to order. And in terms of our attendance, we will let the record reflect Eric is not here tonight. Would you all please rise? We'll start with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start our meeting tonight with approving the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Anybody have anything that we need to change or move around? Hearing none. All in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 4 tonight is our mission moment. I'll turn it over to Mr. Elstad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This month of April, we are clearly in the zone of our safe and caring community, and it's my honor tonight to lift up our school counselors and social workers. And I'm going to ask them to, I'm going to read a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you to stand at the very end, if that's okay. In regard to our school social workers, they support our students and families, starting with our youngest learners in early childhood and continuing through high school and to the ALC. All 11 of our school social workers are mental health professionals. Their expertise in supporting students and families extends from social-emotional lessons in elementary school classrooms to individual and group counseling at all levels, along with promoting a positive school culture. They are the link between school, home, and community in an effort to support students and parents through issues such as homelessness, food insecurity, parenting struggles, grief, chemical issues, medical and dental assistance, and much more. On top of this, the pandemic has skyrocketed the mental health needs among our students and families. Part of their role is to make referrals and set up services within our community agencies. Our school counselors help students become college and career ready, which has been a real focus for us here. But not only do that, but they provide social and emotional support to students through individual and group counseling, referrals, and crisis management, and assist students with academic planning. As we continue to navigate the pre- and post-pandemic effects, as well as general mental health needs, counselors are seeing an even greater need for mental health support within our school communities. The role of counselors has shifted greatly in the past 2 years to focus more on support of the mental health of our students. They work hard to develop creative, individualized systemic supports for students and staff. We, frankly, in the public schools could not do this work without the support we get from our counselors and social workers, especially the last 2 years, but even dating before pandemic. I'd like to, we have some with us tonight. I'd like to ask you to stand as your name is called, and then I'll recognize those that aren't also able to join us tonight. Our counseling staff, we have Tammy Langloy here tonight from the high school, as well as Sarah Craig at the high school and Amy Lagason. If you could remain standing, please. Our other counselors are Lindsay Hugstead-Vaugh at the middle school, Olivia Gullickson at our middle school, Margot McKay here at the high school, Katie Wanyas at the high school, and Jess Procopio, who works with the ALC in Owatonna Online. Our social workers in attendance tonight are Amanda Griswold, Jill Fales, Amanda's at Lincoln, Jill is at Washington, Shelly Flores is at our middle school, Nate Gendron is at the middle school, Nancy Williams is here at the high school, Casey DeVos is at the high school, and Liz Morshing is at the ALC. Also, other social workers that aren't able to join us tonight are Trina Casper, who supports our early learners at the OEC, and Annette Warner, and Sue Schrader. How could I forget Sue Schrader? I'm so sorry, Sue. My apologies. These folks, as I said, are just essential to the work that we have to get done to support the whole child. And I can't be more thankful of the work that you have done and the work that you continue to do. And on behalf of all of our students and staff, we thank you.
Yeah, you know what, Mr. Elstad, typically when we have opportunities like this, we don't open it up for questions. But having these folks here tonight, I know that I know that I have a couple of questions, and I presume that there's a few board members that would have some questions as well. This is a front page item in no matter what periodical, what newspaper you read. We're reading more and more about this, and I'm sure a couple of you wouldn't mind coming up to the podium and tell us what you're dealing with. Tell us what kids are dealing with.
In all fairness, I didn't prepare them, so if one or two
Yeah,
of
yeah.
them would like to come up,
Yeah.
we would appreciate it.
No, I know a fair number of them, and I think they'd do pretty well talking extemporaneously. Nancy will. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Sure. So I work up here at the high school. I've actually been in the district 29 years. Have worked in elementary schools and at Willow Creek when we had that, and then I've been here at the high school for about 15 years. Gosh, a day in the life, it could be a lot of things from, individual scheduled appointments with students. At the high school here, our school social workers specifically work with students in special education. So as part of their IEP, we have the social emotional goals and set up weekly sessions to kind of work on those ways to self-regulate themselves, coping skills, to manage their mental health symptoms, because that has become a big barrier for not only our special ed kids, but regular ed kids in being able to access and do their very best in school. In addition to those things, we work with kids that are homeless. We identify and support families that are doubled up or staying in a hotel or car or in their different homeless shelters that we have in town. Try to kind of give kids whatever they might need to give them a little bit more of a level playing field, be able to come into school and still learn, whether that's food or school supplies, gently used jackets and hats and mittens, things that lots of people in our community donate for us to be able to give out to kids. Sometimes it's help with opportunities to get to jobs, so it might be a token for our Smart Bus to be able to go and do that. Sometimes we have gift cards that we're able to give to families to support them in groceries or individual kids, again, just whatever they might need so that they can be in class and be ready to learn. It's so nice because now we do have free lunch and breakfast for all of our students. It's never a question that they're going to be able to eat at school, but a lot of our families still struggle with what they're eating at home and on the weekends and over long breaks. So that's another big piece of it. We work kind of with the whole school, with our administrative team, very closely with our counselors to just support kids in whatever they might need to be able to be the best student they can. That help? Oh, go ahead.
And then from a school counseling perspective, I would say the word that comes to mind is being flexible. So for our high school staff, counseling staff, we have 4 counselors here, and then we have Katie Wanyas, who works with our REACH students. We have a caseload of about 350 students, and so being flexible is a really important part of our job because we're also working with kids on 3 different domains. So that's their social emotional learning, their academic planning, so could be while they're in school, it could be like signing them up for a concurrent class, which is a college in the schools class. And then we also work on college and career preparedness. So what's life like after high school? So those are the kind of 3 areas that we focus on in our roles at the high school. In the last 2 years specifically, I would say that social emotional piece has really taken priority, of course, in our role. So you could be working on, doing some planning for a program that we have, whether it be like a presentation on what is college in the schools, and then you've got a kid coming down in crisis, and you just have to kind of put some of that other things to the back burner because the kids need you, and they look to us for guidance. They look to us for referring to school social workers or outside supports. That pretty much sums up our role this year. Thank you for having us.
Glad you offered those comments. Thank you. We're going to move on to public forum, item number 5, and this is a good opportunity. Remind everyone the importance of meeting decorum. We do not allow slander, defamation, profanity, personal attacks, or revelations of private data. And as chair, I respectfully request public refrain from interrupting speakers during the public forum. You'll be provided 3 minutes. Asked to state your name and the subject you wish to address. We have 2 cards tonight. The first, Deb Groutman. Hi, Deb. Welcome.
I just have a suggestion here this evening. First of all, I believe that children, all children, are precious gifts from God. It is the responsibility of all adults to not only train and teach them, but also to show them love and respect for each other. In that vein, some of the graphic books that had found their way into the public schools last fall were not appropriate for our schools. It seems to me that this situation is a nationwide problem with origins far outside our local influence. That being said, I believe that many of our educators and even the school board members were surprised at the content as well. Teaching such matters to children too young takes away the natural joy of childhood. That time is far too short to be abused by anyone with a selfish agenda. I want to suggest that new books incoming be reviewed prior to being put on the shelves, perhaps by a parents or grandparents group. Could have volunteers a time to read and review such books before we'd put them on the shelves. I thank you for considering my offer.
Ms. Groutman, thank you. And our other card tonight is Elizabeth Anselmo. Ms. Anselmo, welcome.
Good evening. The correct pronunciation of my last name is Anselmo,
Thank you.
just so you're aware. I am here this evening regarding the task force recommendation to move forward with a proposal from Mr. Paul Warschauer. I did email Chair Sebring and Superintendent Elstead and Bob Olson on April 14th regarding my concerns. I hope that they have shared my email. At this point, I will just read it in part in the event that it was not shared. I have lived in Owatonna since July 2017. My family has very deep roots in Steele County. My children are the 7th generation of my family to live here. My grandmother graduated from OHS in 1937, and my daughters will graduate in 2023 and 2026. I'm an active member of the Steele County Historical Society, most recently serving as the board president last year, and I facilitate the genealogy club there. Like many others in the community, I've been anxiously waiting for information on the development of the property, and I have great concerns about moving forward with Mr. Warschauer. I have personal history. I served on a board of directors with him in 2013. I did share some links and additional information in my email regarding Mr. Warschauer's past, and I would just urge the board at this time to reconsider moving forward with any potential agreement or allotment of time until Mr. Warschauer's been properly vetted as a developer of this property. The best analogy that I can provide for you is the old nut can joke. So everybody knows that joke. You get handed the can of nuts and you know the snakes are gonna pop out. So I've told you what's in the can, and I would urge you not to open it because it's gonna be tough to stuff those snakes back in. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Item 6 tonight, which is just general information, includes the enrollment report. Do any of you have any questions for Mr. Elstead, members of the staff, regarding the contents of the enrollment report? Hearing none, we will move on. We're going to go to item 7. Discussion only, board forum. Daniela, mind if I start with you?
Just a few things going on around the high school are that the last play of the year was yesterday, the Farnsworth invention, I believe it was called. I know that there are a few participants at the DECA competition in Atlanta, Georgia, so that's really cool that a few of our seniors were able to attend. And ACT testings are tomorrow, so I know a lot of juniors are probably nervous about that. We don't have school tomorrow for 9th grade and 12th grade. and AP testing coming up as well, so a lot of students are studying for that. But other than that, there's not much new at the high school.
Prom? Is prom this weekend?
Oh, yes, prom is this weekend. Big prom, yes. I'm very excited, and a lot of other students
I'm
are
sure
as
they are.
well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing.
I don't have anything. Tonight I have two quick things. The first is facilities, and I don't have any report that would be more extensive than what Sal had presented to us 2 weeks ago at our work session, and what we will hear again tonight with regard to that. And that does a much better job of summing up what happened in the facilities meeting. My second item, and I'm not going to steal Mr. Elstad's thunder, but the interviews for a student representative for the school board went really, really well. And I think, in large part, that we've had 2 years of just spectacular representation by Daniela. And the students that interviewed, I think you'll agree, were just over the top good. We'll have the benefit of what will be an incoming junior and an incoming senior. And Mr. Elstad's vision of this from the very beginning was that we would always have two, and they would leapfrog one another in their representation, and it's going to come to fruition. It's exciting. Lori.
Yep. I enjoyed that participation as well. Look forward to those announcements. Policy committee met. It's been a couple weeks now, but we have some things on the agenda in a little bit to share. And otherwise, just congratulations. The speech team, I know, had a great, successful year as well. Took like 8 students to state, which is, I've been kind of watching that one. My kids have been involved over the year. I've never seen numbers like that.
Yeah,
So
it's the largest
really
number
exciting.
we've had in quite a few
Yeah,
years.
so good for them. That's it.
Thank you.
I don't have anything. I'm good.
Okay. We will move on. Item 7A1, which would be the policy revisions. I guess as I read through them, I saw some wordsmithing that took place, but there didn't appear to be anything dramatic with regard to changes. But those of you that are policy committee members, anything you want to address or lift up?
I think that's a fair summary. I don't know, Nikki, if you have anything else.
No, I would agree.
Yeah, more to come. We have a lot to do, and we'll be meeting again soon, so.
Okay.
yeah.
Any
I would just add that, out of this list, there's a couple of them that were part of the legislative session. And as the attorneys sort of go through that for the School Board Association, offer up model policy, that's when we bring them here for consideration, so.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just want to make sure there are any questions that they would be addressed. Doesn't
Yep.
appear as though there are any. We're going to move on.
Mark, just
Go
a
ahead.
comment. So this is the first reading. So
Yes.
if there are any questions or comments, obviously we have time before the next business meeting
That's correct.
to address those.
Item 7B would be the administrative report. I'll turn things over to Mr. Elstad.
Thank you, Mr. Sebring, members of the board. A couple things tonight that I wanted to lift up to you. As you were mentioning, Chair Sebring, about our student school board, I'm happy to announce that the 2 members joining us in June are Jace Forsell, who is a sophomore to be junior, and he will serve 2 years as a student school board rep. And as Mr. Sebring indicated, they'll be leapfrogging, so we will never have a gap, so to speak, so someone will always have some experience. And the other student that will serve a 1-year term is Haley Chairston. Both of them, and again, the entire pool was very talented. It was deliberation, took quite a while, but they'll be joining us in June, and I'll be asking for the board to consider a resolution at our May meeting to add them to a student school board as a non-voting member of the school board to provide student perspectives moving forward. Secondly, a legislative report. At this point, a lot of the work, especially committee work, is done. And if not today, I'm certainly that this week both the House and the Senate will vote on their respective education budgets. The next steps beyond that point then are to really bring a conference committee together that will involve 5 members of the Senate, 5 members of the House, to sort of work out the deals, which is typically what we see in mid-May. They have a constitutional adjournment date set for May 23rd. Beyond that point, what has been the record for the last few years anyway, is that they'd have special session after that. Just a quick reminder that this is not a typical budgeting year, and so the House nor the Senate have to act on any budgetary items. But of course, we have been advocating on behalf of our school district. One in particular is to reduce some of the impact on our taxpayers with some equalization aid, additional equalization aid that would help put us on the same footing as some of the districts that are larger, that have a larger tax base. We're just looking to help hopefully equalize that so the zip code doesn't determine the level of funding that you get from the state. With that, I believe that is all that I have to mention this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to move on to item 8 tonight, which would be the consent agenda, would include minutes from March 21st and April 11th, disbursement, as well as the personnel report. Anybody have a reason to believe we should pull something out? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion to accept.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. This is a roll call vote. Tim, do you mind doing the roll call?
Joanne?
Aye.
Deborah?
Aye.
Lori?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Nikki?
Aye.
And I myself am an aye.
That motion carries.
So passed.
Tim, that's pretty good on the, doing that on the fly. You're gonna do it one more time with gifts to the district. Item 9 tonight, which does require board action, the first of which would be the identified official with authority to authorize user access to MDE secure websites. This is something we approve every year. Mr. Elstad, you'll give us a brief description of this.
What you're being asked to consider approving tonight is to name me as the official with authority, or the identified official with authority. This is for things like securing our service financial, to make sure that we're able to submit budgets and applications for those budgets, among many, many other things, including personnel reports that we have to do with the State Department. When all of the work is done, I have to sign off on all of those reports so that the state doesn't send us the nasty grams in regard to not having it done or filing those. So we're asking for your consideration to approve that, like as you mentioned, which is an annual piece we typically accomplish this time of the year.
Anybody have any questions? Want to be kind enough to introduce this motion for us?
I move that the board authorize Jeff Alstead to act as the identified official with authority for Owatonna Public School District 761.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Item B, which is the 2021-2022 final budget. Again, we had a good, detailed and full explanation of this from Amanda just 2 weeks ago. I think any questions, we had a good opportunity to vet those out at that point in the game. Anybody have any questions for Amanda? She's here tonight with regard to the budget. No? One more time, would one of you be kind enough to introduce this?
Sure. I move that the board approve the 2021-2022 final budget as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item C would be the ratification of the 2021 through 2023 tentative agreement with the Owatonna Principals Association. I'll turn things over to Mr. Elstad for a quick explanation.
Again, what you're asked to be, being asked to consider this evening is a tentative agreement with the Owatonna Principals Association. We have a number of bargaining units. We've been successfully working through those agreements with our relative employee groups, and this is our group of principals and assistant principals that work in the district that worked with the team, our negotiations team, to negotiate this agreement.
And it was consistent with
Very much so.
every group that has
That's correct.
come forward. Any questions? One of you be kind enough to introduce this motion for us?
I move that the board approve the 2021 through the 2023 agreement with the Owatonna Principals Association and authorize the chair and clerk to execute the agreement on behalf of the school board.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Item D tonight is the existing Owatonna High School Citizens Task Force recommendation. We have Sal Bagley from Wold Architects here, and the very quick description or backstory on this is, granted, we had the benefit of this same basic presentation 2 weeks ago at the work session. Work sessions, because they are not recorded, I have asked that Sal would give us basically the same presentation, maybe a little bit of an abbreviated version of it, because now that this is recorded, it gives Owatonna an opportunity to see just exactly what came of the recommendation from this community task force. And with that, Sal, thank you and welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Been a couple weeks. So I'm here to give you the task force recommendation. At the work session 2 weeks ago, we did have several task force members there who were able to answer some questions, give their perspective, and I wanted to start by saying thank you to them for all their time and effort. As you'll see, it actually was quite a lengthy process and extended a couple months longer than we intended, or the journey took a little longer than initially thought, but I think they're proud of the recommendation they have for you tonight. So I'm going to take us back to last October, where you all authorized a charge statement for the task force process. So that outlined the fact that this building will no longer be used for K-12 instruction when the high school opens in 2023. And as a part of the successful bond referendum, that the community did vote to approve question number 2, which allocated some funds for the conversion of this property into other district functions. And as a part of that, all throughout the campaign, the district did commit to engaging with the community about the future of this building, and so the task force was really a big part of that process. From an overall timeline perspective, the community engagement phase really went for about 1 year. So in just April of last year, so 1 year ago, is when the Engage Owatonna website went up, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that was all community members, anyone who was interested, was able to submit ideas for how they think that this building could be used to benefit the rest of the community, and that was open for several months. Then over the summer, many of those ideas were qualified, and potential partners were interviewed and talked to. And then we worked to get the task force process ready in the fall with your authorization of their charge statement in last October. Then the task force met 5 times from November of 2021 through March of 2022. Look at that, there's a typo. Should say March 22 there. In the meantime, the administration and the board have been working on project scope and partnerships, and then obviously we've come today to April 2022 to receive the recommendation. On the right-hand side is the district's proposed project schedule, and so with the completion of this process, or at least this phase of the process coming to an end, the district's conversion project can start. So design would begin in June of 2022 to start actually doing the design for the conversion of the parts of the building that the district will be using, which I'll talk about later, with the idea that we're gearing up to be ready for construction once this is no longer used as a high school, so come late next summer. So the charge of the task force was to review ideas submitted from the community, so we passed forth all of the Engage Owatonna ideas, to discuss potential partnerships with other entities and prioritize them in terms of feasibility and importance to the community, to make a recommendation to the board as to the proposed scope of the renovation project, which could include areas to be remodeled and areas to potentially demolish, and that they needed to take into consideration financial feasibility and best use of the facility. Here is a list of all of the members who served on the task force, and we had great attendance. I would say most people made it to all meetings, if not maybe missed one for being sick. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see myself and a couple of my colleagues, as well as the administration who served as resources, but were not voting members of the task force. From a process perspective, the task force, as I said, met 5 times. So meeting number 1 was in early November, and then they met about every 2 weeks through December. We were actually supposed to have a meeting number 4 right before Christmas, and the weather canceled that for us. So picked back up on January 6th, and then you'll see a long gap in there between January 6th and March 22nd, which is when we went out for proposals, which I talked about at the work session, and we will talk about a little bit later. So at the very first meeting, what we spent time with the task force doing is reviewing their charge statement, as well as what was included in the bond referendum. So as many of you know, or you're probably very aware, there was a 2-question ballot that was successful in November of 2019. The first question was for the new high school, which allocated $112 million. And then question 2 was to use $8 million to repurpose the current high school. There was about $3 million in question 1 in case question 2 did not pass. So if the community had not voted to repurpose this facility for district use, there was money set aside for the demolition of this building or conversion. And so now that both questions have passed, you actually have those two funding sources combined. So the $3 million from question 1 and the $8 million in question 2. So that is the funding for the district's portion of the project. It was made clear to the task force that any potential partnerships would require funding from that proposed partner, as the district's funds were really only set aside to address their needs. And the ideas or the intended functions that were laid forth during the referendum campaign were that the 3-story portion at the northwest corner, or the C Plaza, sorry, it's not reacting, is anticipated to be remodeled to house the district offices, that the VOAG or annex building is anticipated to be used for district maintenance shops. And then there was a couple other conversations about the tennis courts. This was talked about during the referendum campaign. The gymnasium and locker rooms anticipated to house high school and youth gymnastics programs, and for the track and field to be available for district and community use. So again, this was what was discussed in the referendum, but really what the task force was brought forth to study. And so this was really grounding work for them. We did review a site map at the first meeting with the task force. For those who might not be as familiar with the facility, this is a graphic that was used during the 2019 bond referendum campaign. For those who are maybe not seeing it, or they're seeing it for the first time. So you can see here there was the intent of using the C Plaza in the upper left-hand corner for district services. There's various ages of the buildings labeled for your benefit, and then the VOAG building or annex building on the southern part of the property for other district services. Also at the first meeting, we reviewed the Engage Owatonna process, and so this was a website that was made available to anyone in the community, and it was open for several months to submit ideas for how this building could or should be used. So this is just a screenshot of what that website looked like when it was open, and there were dozens of ideas submitted, and actually the way that that website works is that people could interact with other people's submitted ideas and kind of upvote them or star them or favorite them, and so we had some ideas from that process of what favorite ideas were. At our work session presentation 2 weeks ago, we did go through, I think it was 3 or 4 slides of submitted ideas, but suffice to say that there were ideas all the way from housing to office space to educational space to community centers and hotels and retail, and so all sorts of ideas came forth in that process, which we shared all of those with the task force at their very first meeting. And then we also just help people understand the building a little bit. So if you live or work in this building, you are very familiar with these terms, but not everybody on the task force was. So we talked about what are the A, B, and C plazas and when were they constructed, what part of the building is original. So you can see in the red highlighted area here what was the original 1921 building, and then just over time what has been added onto or major renovation eras. So in the mid-50s there was a major expansion of the building. In the late 50s is when the G-wing in the upper right-hand corner was added. The VOAG building was in the late 70s, and then of course the plazas of 1998. So we just showed them that on every single floor, just so they had that working knowledge. At the second meeting, I don't have a slide for it, but we actually spent about half of the meeting taking a detailed tour of the building. So we broke into 3 groups. And everybody got to see the various vintages of the building, as well as getting to see kind of a behind-the-scenes tour of the spaces not often seen by the public, for their benefit as they think about what this building could be used for in another life. We also then spent some time talking about the other facilities in the district office and the Rose Street facility that are proposed to be moved here, and what are the challenges and issues at those sites. So on the right-hand side here, you can see an image of the Rose Street facility in downtown Owatonna. That is currently used for grounds and maintenance operations primarily, as well as some training space. So the challenges with that building are inadequate equipment and vehicle storage. I'll show you a couple pictures. It does have a challenging configuration of levels as well. So it's an accessibility challenged building, and as well as a lack of parking and maneuvering space, especially for large vehicles, which that building does get a lot of deliveries from semis or other large vehicles. The building is from the mid-50s, so 1956, and it had a renovation in 1999, and it's a little bit less than 14,000 square feet. Here's a couple pictures from within that building. Again, it's primarily used for maintenance and operations, but Bob Olson gave the task force a little bit of background about the challenges there. As well as why the VOAG building, I should say, why the VOAG building would work well. Being all on one level, being a large bay space that's been planned for vehicle maintenance and being able to put vehicles up on lifts. It's got garage doors, it's got great turning radiuses for trucks, and so that is why that had originally been conceived of. Couple pictures of the site here. So these buildings certainly have some maintenance needs as well. I'm standing in the kind of the back corner of the site on the bottom photo here. And so trucks have to come off the street and really take a series of turns to be able to make deliveries, which in the winter can be quite challenging especially. For the district office, that's the other major district function that's been proposed to move to this building. The challenges that were discussed with the task force are really about just having outgrown available space. And so as the district's added some positions, that you're really running out of places to put people, especially in appropriate locations, that the building is aged and does need significant reinvestment, especially when it comes to its HVAC systems. And then it is not compliant for ADA. And so there's a half-level change within the building that's difficult for mobility challenged persons to navigate. It's actually a building built in the same year as the Rose Street facility. It was renovated a year prior in '97, and it's just a little bit more than 12,000 square feet. So we spent a little time talking about why those functions were proposed to move to this site and why the C Plaza and the VOAG parts of the building were identified as being good candidates for that. I should say the C Plaza was identified because of its presence to the public on the street, having an entrance, having a relatively flexible floor plate in regards to its construction, as well as the maintenance needs for that part of the building are less significant than other wings of the building. We were asked by the task force to do a kind of a test fit or help explain how those functions actually fit in the parts of the building that they were originally proposed to be in. So this is a close-up, again, a test fit, not a design, of how the various equipment and vehicles of the grounds and maintenance crew would fit within the VOAG building. And so you can see on the top of the drawing are really the two big shop areas that are about a story and a half or 2 stories high. So that's where you would keep a large equipment. You could have lifts for vehicles, and then interior vehicle storage, which obviously in our climate is great. There's some intermediate spaces that would work well for tool shop or workshops. There's an office space that can access either of those big bay spaces. And then the classrooms on the southern part of the building would be proposed to be storage space and some office space as well. Again, a test fit, not a design, of how the district office function would fit into the C Plaza part of the building. So just to orient you, the upper left-hand corner of this would be the first floor of the C Plaza, and then what's colored orange here is the locker rooms that are underneath the gymnasium. At the bottom of the drawing, you can see in small text it says below forum. So we're in the forum space right now, just to help people understand. So the idea would be what is the current wrestling room could be used for a large meeting or training space. And then the current fitness, somewhere in the design, but the current fitness area is identified as a replacement mechanical room. As if other parts of the building were either not owned or occupied by the district, we would need to make sure to have somewhere for a boiler plant, water heater, things of that nature, new utilities to come in. The intent would be to maintain the locker room spaces for the athletic functions that would use the gymnasium. And then if I go upstairs, you can see the intent was to maintain the gymnasium for both community use, but as well as district gymnastics programming was one of the top reasons why. And then on the left-hand side of the drawing here, you can see on the second floor of C Plaza just a first pass test fit at how the district office functions would fit within the classrooms and flexible space of the C Plaza. Again, we will be going through a whole design process in the near term here. And then on the third floor, the idea would be to have some meeting spaces and training spaces. So there's a couple of classrooms over at our meeting spaces, classroom-sized meeting spaces at Rose Street that could be housed somewhere within the C Plaza. Obviously, there's a demand for conference spaces for the district office. And then there's storage of materials and documents. So they come with some record storage and things of that nature. And so that's really how those two parts of the buildings were identified for district uses and how we figured out how much of the high school is needed for district functions. So all of that happened before winter break, and then we had a meeting get canceled because of weather. But at the end of that meeting, there was some people, I think after taking the tour and understanding the challenges of the building, were wondering if the district could take the funding from the referendum and choose to do something different with it. And so we did go, we worked with Amanda Heimland to get a legal opinion about could the money allocated in the referendum be used on a different site to accomplish the same needs. And it was really made quite clear for the task force that the last line of the ballot question says where the funds can be used and what the funds can be used for. Now, if you accomplish your intent in a bond referendum, you are able to use the excess to go address other needs, but they advised that it would not be plausible or recommended to take the $8 million from question 2 and go build a new one somewhere else, right? That's not what you asked the public for approval on. That's not what they voted on. So I think that helped clarify for some people, again, what our charge was. So then the rest of that meeting was really spent talking about making a motion and really how to start addressing the district's needs first. And so a task force member made the motion, and it was seconded and then voted by the whole group that the district should vacate the existing district office and Rose Street buildings and consolidate them into the C building and VOAG building, and that the gym and locker rooms should be retained for district and/or community use. Certainly there was a lot of discussion in the task force about things like the tennis courts or the track and field, and while those would be valuable community assets, they didn't see them as mission critical to the functions of the district office or maintenance. So they chose to be silent on them in this statement, just to be open-ended. Because what they actually spent a lot of time talking about is trying to determine or discern what actual interested parties would be in owning or operating parts of the existing high school. And so we worked with them to develop this request for preliminary proposals. So they helped us come up with the suitable use criteria, and then we worked to pull together some information for any interested developers, like background, information about the building. We had some submission requirements for this request for preliminary proposals and a timeline and a schedule. Information about the building was provided to them, including floor plans, the assessor report from the county, the facility analysis, which went over the deferred maintenance needs of the building, as well as, again, those ideas submitted by the general public via Engage Owatonna website. The RFPP cover page is on the left-hand side there. So when it came to the suitable use criteria, we explained for interested proposers that a task force had been established and that they had developed some suitable use criteria that they felt was important for any proposer to know. And that included that the project should be financially responsible and consider leveraging a variety of funding sources, that the project needed to benefit the community as a whole, and that the project needed to benefit the surrounding neighborhood. And they clarified that that was from a lens of safety and security for the neighborhood, quality of life for the neighborhood, and would not negatively impact property values. We did lay out some submission requirements in this request for preliminary proposals. Many of them I've already said to you tonight, but that the district intends to own and operate the C Plaza, gymnasium, locker room spaces, and VOAG building, as well as support spaces like parking and other development needs, stormwater management. Those interested in submitting a proposal should contact Bob Olson. They were allowed to take a tour if they so chose. That it would be acceptable for respondents to be interested in portions or parts of the facility, and that they should indicate this in their proposal. That respondents were responsible for costs incurred in the preparation of their proposal. So that would be things like printing or site visits or anything like that, that the district has not incurred any cost as a result. That there's no minimum purchase price, but that they should be advised that portions of the building would be sold or made available as is, and things like code challenges or any maintenance would not be done prior to that sale. And that any and all regulatory requirements like rezoning would be the responsibility of the respondent and not the district. So this is what we actually asked them to submit. So we asked them to submit a cover letter including their contact information, a summary of the proposed uses for the property, a narrative of the benefits to the community and neighborhood, a conceptual timeline, any other relevant information, and then intended project financing or strategy. And it was made note that financing was not needed to be secured, but that they needed to remark on how they might finance it as an indicator of seriousness and viability. From a timeline perspective, we again finessed the RFPP with the task force. We talked about it on January 6th. Then we sent them out a draft for their comment, and we did get several comments back from task force members over the course of about a week. And then it was finalized and issued, made public on January 26th. It was put on the district's website, press release made, and then there were a couple specific entities that the task force asked to make sure that received it, some developers and other entities in town. And it was out and made available for about 1 month. So they were requested to be due back on February 28th. The district did receive 2 proposals. So 2 proposals were received by February 28th, and I think the very next day an initial meeting was held with each of them to answer any questions related to their proposals, one of which is the task force recommendation for you to enter into a developer agreement tonight. The other proposal, I think, while it had its merits, really focused on the idea of a community center, but did not have much in the way of details about how it would be funded or financed or who would be the developer. And so it was not, I would say it was not moved forward because of its lack of detail, which is really what the task force was looking for. They were looking to really call the question as to who was actually interested instead of just being a fun idea. And so after those initial meetings, we granted both proposers a week extension. The one proposer actually did not revise their proposal, and so we did not consider it complete. But Grand Venues did revise their proposal. And so that was about a week later, we got an updated proposal, and that's what I'll move into now. So Grand Venues is a representative, Paul Warschauer, and it's a company based out of Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. And I'll talk through the details of his proposal, but he would propose creating a company called the Former Owatonna High School LLC, or FOHS, which I'll reference for the rest of the presentation. They are a development company that focuses on historic properties. They have done several similar projects. The task force actually did look at his website and look at his resume and his portfolio. Certainly if you go onto his website and click on the second tab over, you can see what other similar projects he's worked on. I believe the New Ulm High School redevelopment was one of the projects of particular interest to the task force. There's also a real theme in theatrical venues in his or his company's portfolio. But I would say one major thing that the task force, I think they were excited to get a viable proposal back, but they struggled with not knowing exactly what the high school would be used for. And that's for good reason. It was lots of discussion had with Paul Warschauer about that a development project of this size and scale really takes quite some time to put together. He would need to work to find potential tenants, secure financing, and so while his proposal did indicate a real level of seriousness, it did not lay out that they would use these parts of the building for these uses for this cost. It's not to that level of detail quite yet. And so through a couple of meetings, it was decided that it would be appropriate to enter into, or to recommend to the board, to enter into a development agreement to really allow for appropriate time for those details to be fleshed out. The task force had a lot of questions about that. And so I've laid out some of the parameters, and actually I think your next agenda item is that very developer agreement. So the task force talked about how he would want to be able to talk about the project publicly. So he would want to be able to not have a confidentiality clause on the agreement, for example. One of the requests was that you work with them exclusively over a period of 180 days, which would mean that you don't also have a similar competing agreement with another developer who is also working on ideas. And then there was a couple details like when we would work out property lines so that the district's project could move forward, and when utilities and their delivery needed to be worked out. There was also a request for some, like, if the district doesn't need all of the kitchen or fax equipment on site, could that stay? And so there were some specific requests made in the proposal in the amended version that was received a week later. And the task force, I think, like I said, was excited by getting a proposal, but also wanted to know more. Some of the discussion had at the task force was wondering what this would mean for the district, what this 180-day time period would mean. And it's a non-binding agreement. And so at the end of 180 days, you would receive back a proposal or more detailed proposal from this company, but you are not predisposed or in any way again, non-binding, so you don't have to take it. This really just allows the appropriate vetting to take place. So I think many task force members thought that it brought a lot of hope, and it was the most serious proposal that you've had since the time you've been talking about having a new high school, which has been years by many measures. And so there was a lot of optimism, but also wondering. And so the task force, they reviewed the submission. And like I said, they were generally excited, but had a lot of questions. Many of them, I think, would take the stance that it was that we don't have anything to lose if it doesn't cost us any money and it's non-binding, and that it would mean a lot to the community to show that we have really tried to run this out and tried to find the rest of the building a new life, even if it doesn't fit the district's mission and it's not something that you need to maintain your operations, right? It's physical footprint that you can't afford to maintain. They did ask to be maintained or kept in the loop about progress. So they'd like to get regular updates as to how it's going, and then they would like to be brought back together before any formal agreement was made, because they were still interested in what the actual reuses would be. So at the meeting in March, again, we reviewed the proposal, and then they worked to develop this recommendation. And so this is the official recommendation to all of you. So the recommendation is that the district own and operate the C Plaza, gymnasium, locker room spaces, and VOAG building, as well as support spaces like parking. And that would take over the functions that are currently at the district office in Rose Street. And we put the formal addresses in the recommendation. They recommended to you that you enter into a development agreement with Paul Warschauer of Grand Venues, or FOHS, to explore potential redevelopment of the remainder of the building and complex, as outlined in his proposal from March 9th. That you provide regular updates to the task force as the whole process progresses, and that you call the task force back to action when more information is made available. We anticipated that that could be near the end of 180 days, right, as it's coming into focus, but certainly could be sooner than that if more information or meaningful information is known. And they, again, were quite clear that they wanted that to happen before you make final decisions. And then they wanted us to make sure that the suitable use criteria were included in the recommendation again. So whatever the reuse be, that it should be financially responsible, consider leveraging a variety of funding types, benefit the community as a whole, and be beneficial to the surrounding neighborhood. So I think with that, I would love to take any questions or comments. I don't know if we have any task force members here tonight. I should have asked. Doesn't look like it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do we currently own or rent the district office or the Rose Street facility?
You own both of them.
So would we be able to sell them if?
Yeah, that would be the intent upon the development and design of the campus as you saw laid out tonight. And those proceeds from sale could go towards the repurposing of this space or other, and that would be up to the board to decide how we might allocate those additional funds should we sell. And I think part of the intent, and this was part of the task force discussion too, and district's intention would be to continue to really shrink our footprint and be more efficient, which is why we would look to centralize a lot of our services versus having kind of little bits of property all over the community.
And more flexible in one building as opposed
Correct.
to two smaller facilities as well. Good questions.
And what if after the 180 days, if Paul is not able to come up with proposals that are more specific for us, if that falls through, then what? We start over or what?
The task force did discuss that quite some time. So obviously come fall of 2023, this is no longer a high school. And at that point it becomes a maintenance burden to you as a large facility without a use. And so I think many on the task force were concerned that if something were to fall through, that what's our plan B? And so I think that's part of the reason why they felt strongly about being pulled back together. So that if it's not looking promising or if it's been actually decided that, that the proposal is not viable, that they would want to come back together and bring you back another recommendation as to how to address that. So I think they all feel that the clock is ticking before the time that the district has too large of a footprint to maintain, and that wouldn't be appropriate financially. But obviously that would lay with the school board at that time, whether you chose to extend that time frame or if somebody else had come forward during that time when you're exclusive with this one developer. Obviously at that point then a new clock could start, but again, in a short 8 months from then is when you really need to be making a decision or you're spending money.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah?
Do you know if the exclusivity is up for discussion? Again, I know that you can't flip a switch and get other developers interested, but if halfway through it appears as though it's not viable, we're still stuck with 180 days and still can't talk to anybody else.
In the developer agreement, if I may, in the developer agreement, there's a clause in there that allows us to get out if we feel like there's nothing coming to fruition.
Okay.
And at that point, it's upon mutual agreement. But again, that would allow some flexibility and it also allows the flexibility for grand venues that if they're just not seeing that this is coming together, that they would be able to, rather lack of other words, bail on this project, which then would open up other opportunities, but go back to the task force, as Sal indicated, about what our next options might be.
Thank you.
Nikki, anything else?
No.
Just to be crystal clear from the standpoint of the district, we have no financial skin in the game. This contract is giving this gentleman and his company really the opportunity to go talk to investors, to say, this is what I've got going on, I've got 6 months to pull something together, do you have interest? So
Correct.
This-
No financial responsibility for this, and it's not holding up your project either.
right, because
Design would start on your project.
From perspective of the existing building, we really have time on our hands. We have time on our hands, and we have no financial interest in this whatsoever. So
And it's non-binding.
right.
So even if it was a viable proposal back and the board was not interested in that proposal, you're not beholden to
So
it.
he can come back and say, this is what I'm gonna do, and this is what it's gonna cost, and we can assess
Same.
it and go back to that criteria and say, you know what, it's not meeting the criteria that the task force has brought forward with priorities with property value, safety, security, fits within the neighborhood. We can ultimately say, nope, even though you do have a proposal, we're not gonna accept it.
That's all still within the board's
Okay.
purview, yep.
Okay, thank you.
And that was important to many task force members too,
Yeah,
that do we have to accept whatever comes back, and the answer was no.
No.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I mean, it seems to me the risk that Nikki pointed out is really our biggest
Right.
risk, right? Is
Yep.
that somehow we eliminate other interested parties, but the fact is the task force has done that legwork. I mean, you
Right.
guys have, they've sought those proposals and vetted what came forward, so I think it's a low
And
risk,
I
frankly.
think it goes without saying that, I mean, we've known since November of 2019 that this building had some sort of, and we have, the two proposals received are the only ones we've received in over 2 years on this project. And so I think the task force was really diligent about, making sure that if there's nothing invested by the district other than a little bit of time, by the way, which we have. We have an entire year yet to really decide how this could go. They wanted to make sure that we just vetted every potential option before what could be demolition. And I think that was the intention of the task force, was to really make sure that we took every opportunity we could to see what else might be available.
I would add to that, Superintendent Alstad, that I think many of them would fear having a building sitting around without use for extended periods of time for the financial aspect of that. So they feel the pressures on too.
That was clear to be from task force members, that they knew that we couldn't mothball a building for 5 to 10 years and just let it sit, because we still have to keep the heat on and the electricity going, and that was clear. That was a clear message from the task force that they needed to have something happen. Something had to be done.
If we can't get somebody in here, is there a likelihood of demolishing the rest of the building that we're not using for the district office or for the trucks and stuff?
That certainly is an option, and the task force, as you mentioned, would like to come back together. Should, all of this fall through, they want to come back together and at least explore if there's any possible options. Maybe over the next 180 days, maybe someone would call and say, hey, if it doesn't work out there, let us know. We'd like to talk further about what we might have planned for or what we could do. But eventually, if that all falls through, the board would have to consider then the approval of demolishing the parts of the property that weren't part of the recommendation.
Sal, I have one clarifying question. I can't remember the slide number, but you mentioned it, the term in the development agreement discussing property lines and the need to know those inside of 90 days. So is that really, it's in our interest to get that. Is that fair, or can you talk about that term, or where that came from, or who's looking for
Sure.
it?
So For your project to proceed and go through, for example, city planning approvals, we'll need to know what property you intend to own and operate, and understand what amounts of parking and where parking needs to go and stormwater management. And so getting that ironed out as soon as possible is in the district's best interests, as well as the, I would say, untangling of utilities so that the C Plaza and the VOAG building can operate independently. Again, we have to kind of imagine what if the existing building remains up but owned by somebody else, and what if it's not here anymore? And so that's, the sooner we can have clarity in both of those questions, the better.
And then one other clarifying question. I know we saw the list of people on the committee or the task force. There are some folks on there with like building, contracting backgrounds. Is that right? Can you just comment again? Because one of the gentlemen who spoke at the work session I thought was really insightful, articulate. He seemed to have understanding of some of these issues.
Yeah, I think we had some with construction background, some design background, some real estate background, some finance background.
Yeah, really
we had some
a
staff.
Nice mix of different vocations. I think the folks that had finance backgrounds saw that this is not something we can just let stand for 10 years because it's not financially feasible for the district to continue to support that. I think those that were involved in the construction industry looked at this project and said, whoa, that's a big undertaking.
They saw the challenge. Yep.
It's a challenge. There are certainly challenges involved with that, and whether or not that would be a viable investment from their perspective. But again, many of them weren't in restoration sort of projects. Many of them were, green builds and other sort of construction trades. So.
Thank you.
One last. Reasonable access is very vague. I imagine there's some criteria around that Mr. Olson would be comfortable not having to come in on the 4th of July.
Is there a new clause about that in the development agreement? Yep. It's next agenda item, but we can answer the question.
If I may, because these are two separate, just point of order, because they're two separate agenda items, perhaps it would be good for the board to wrap up this item and then we can go on to the developer agreement.
Sure.
Sorry.
No problem.
Well, with that, it is one big topic.
It is.
And we're going to break it out, and we'll, and you make a very good point. This is a big topic. There are 2 agenda items to address. And Nikki, the question that you're asking is addressed in the developer agreement?
Yes.
Do you mind waiting?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? And we're at that point. Are there any of the questions that have to do with the recommendation from the task force?
I could also clarify that the PowerPoint is not the agreement, the developer agreement. So that phrasing has been updated in the formal agreement. Yes.
With that, Tim has it queued up. I'll ask that Tim introduce the motion.
Okay. I move that the board approve the recommendation to own and operate the C Plaza of the existing high school and the gymnasium and locker room spaces and VOAG building, as well as support spaces such as parking to support functions currently housed at 515 West Bridge Street and 115 East Rose Street, and call the task force back to action when more information is available.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor with an aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Amanda, if you would come up, please. So the quick background is, as this proceeded, as things came together, Mr. Elstad, Amanda worked with the attorney for the school district, drew up the developer agreement, brought some things to light as it came about that were relevant and germane to the things that were happening with all of this. Thankful for their work, thankful for your work. You want to give us the overview?
So Sal did a great job of kind of summarizing some of the main things that we included in this agreement, but essentially what this agreement is doing is providing that 180-day exclusivity period for the contract or the developer to really vet out anyone interested to come in here to really get some, letters of intent solidified and to then bring a proposal back to this board for your potential approval. So Nikki, to answer your question, as part of the reasonable access piece, we did include a clause in the statement that says the developer acknowledges that a site is an operating high school with strict limits on data privacy and all of those other things. So We aren't having an office on site. There isn't unfettered access. He's not going to have a badge. I mean, he's going to have to go through Mr. Olson to make sure that he's here outside of school time. Most of the time, as far as if he's vetting people to come through the building, is going to be when our students are not in the building. So there is that clause in there, so there shouldn't be concerns with that. At the end of this 180-day period, we did put some stipulations on what we would like the developer to bring back to the school board. One is a site plan showing the proposed development and use of the development area, including the proposed property lines that we talked about earlier. We want to develop that within 90 days so that we can move forward on our portions of the project too. We want a proposal detailing the proposed use of the existing buildings and outdoor facilities within the development area and how the uses will work in conjunction with the district's continued use and support of our portions of the site. We want the utilities separated between the district and the subsequent development area so that we can obviously establish that for our side of the project. We want an estimate of the cost of developing the development area in the manner set forth in the proposal. A list of the funding sources obviously is how is he going to fund the project to make sure that this is going to be feasible. And then also an estimated timeline for the redevelopment, because as we've talked about, it's a large building and we don't want to just have it sitting there for 10 to 15 years. So we do want a timeline for that. Obviously all the costs are going to be bared upon the developer. The district does not have any financial responsibility for the development or the proposal that he's going to be bringing forward. And it is specified there that we do intend to retain ownership of obviously the C Tower, the tennis courts, the Ag Building, and then the sufficient related parking, and as Sal mentioned, like stormwater in case we have to do that kind of stuff. So just some additional development area. Are there any other, those are the big highlight pieces. And we do, as Mr. Elstad mentioned when you asked the question earlier, Nikki, we do have, if something is not going right, we can provide in writing within 14 days that they're, the developer's in default, and we can go through that and we could pull back from that if we needed to, so.
Just one clarifying question.
Yep.
I've lost connection here and I can't seem to
Yep.
get it back. So what you're reading from is the attachment that was in the agenda, is that
Yep,
fair?
it's the actual
Nothing's
agreement
changed.
itself.
You'd said
Yep.
something was updated. So I've seen that version and I've read it. I just
Yeah,
wanted
that
to
wasn't
confirm
updated. I
nothing-
think we just meant the PowerPoint didn't
Yep.
have the specifics that we have in the development agreement here.
Yep, so I've read through that. No,
Yep.
thank you.
Further questions? And Nikki, did that address?
It did address
Okay.
that, yes, I appreciate it. And I knew I had read that somewhere, I just couldn't find
Yep.
it. So one last thing. So my concern is the 180 days and then nothing happening and somebody maybe expressing interest after 90, again, in dream world. And we're stuck for the 180 and then nothing happens and now we have to basically start the 180-day process all over again, and we've got a short time window really. I don't see any, is there a time frame, say at the 90-day point, that we get an update on how things are going?
The way I envision this working is I think we're going to be having, a lot of conversations with FOHS LLC,
Yep.
obviously throughout this process, because it says on or before the 180 days, we want them to bring a proposal forward. So,
Right.
Obviously this is going to take a while for him to vet out, intended parties and things like that. So that's why he would like the 180-day exclusivity period, but we're going to have more details as we're going through. It's not like we're going to have to wait, 180 days to kind of maybe brief you on what's happening. Like we'll be having conversations throughout that process, and we can certainly bring that back and kind of update you as to where we're at.
Although when I read this, it sounds like he really wouldn't have to bring anything back until
He wouldn't technically,
180 days.
but I will be having conversations within that 180-day period. I would envision. So.
But Nikki, to your point, as I read this, right, unless he's in default, and there are very few items that he can default upon within the
Right.
180 days.
Right.
Yep.
I think to be realistic and so forth, I would expect, we're gonna.
Yep.
Lots
It's
of
going to take that
conversation.
time. Yes, there's going to be lots of
Absolutely.
conversation, but that's why he's proposing the
And-
180 days. It's going
And
to take.
he could come to his own conclusion earlier and say, oh, this isn't gonna work, and walk away. But whether we can force that inside of that 180, I don't think we wanna count
Yeah.
on that, right?
Right.
We wanna
And Nikki,
expect that we'll take the
from a
180.
development standpoint, I think if someone does come on day 91,
Yep.
and we just say this is kind of where we're at, in another 89 days, you're gonna have an opportunity. I don't think that's gonna make or break a deal because it's such a big development process.
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds good.
because it's not like it's an extra year or it's an extra, 2 years. It's
Yep.
90 days.
Right.
So,
I think one critical thing to remember is that the task force recommendation that you just improved gets us started on the portions that we're going to really retain for district purposes. And then should this run out, I don't anticipate another 180-day process, but I believe it would go back to the task force then for a final recommendation for the other parts of the property and what the board would be considering at that time. So if you run out the timeline, if executed, this evening or this week, we'll look at the end of October was when that 180 days would be about done. And then it would really be moving forward about what are the next steps leading up to and at the end of 180 days.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Further discussion?
All right, thank you.
Does anybody have the motion queued up?
Yep, I can. I move that the district enter into a development agreement with Paul Warschauer of Grand Venues, former Owatonna High School LLC, to explore potential redevelopment of existing high school buildings as proposed.
We have a motion and any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor with an aye? Any opposed? That motion carries. Final item tonight would be gifts to the district. You all received a copy of the gifts that were received. Mr. Elstad, anything to add with regard to that?
Yeah, a number of gifts this evening. We have some events coming up in the school that our students have asked for gifts, including our upcoming prom this weekend, as well as the DECA competition and DECA program had made some requests. There's a larger one for $17,500, which includes a $15,000 annual donation coming from the Mayo Clinic Health System. That is actually being used to, as we construct the new high school, part of the building on the main floor will have a nursing lab, which is where we'll be running our CNA preparation courses, as well as nursing. And at an upcoming presentation, I really want to have Michelle Krell share the progress that's been made. What a great opportunity for students to not only investigate, but invest themselves in the nursing profession or other medical fields for that matter, to the point where students would be just a few credits short of an LPN once they graduate from high school. So that's an upcoming presentation, but part of the gift from the Mayo Clinic Health System is to put equipment and other things within that nursing lab so that students have a really relevant and authentic experience when they enter into that lab.
Nice.
But again, a number of gifts, and again, I say this every month, but it goes without saying that we have a very philanthropic community, and they support our schools, and I couldn't be more appreciative.
Any questions? I'll make the motion that the board approve the resolution for acceptance of gifts as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Tim, would you do it for us one more time?
Joanne?
Aye.
Deborah?
Aye.
Lori?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Nikki?
Aye.
And I am an aye.
Motion carries. Thanks, Tim. Final is to adjourn. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, folks.